That being said, the loans and mortgages who's who. So here's what's really going on, right? And this really dispels all of the money guru types and talking about systems and banks and all the rest of it when they talk about fractal reserve banking and money being backed by gold and all the rest of the shite nonsense that I once thought was true. And, well, we know a little differently now. So here we go. In order for a crime, any crime to exist, there must be proof of intent, where ignorance of the law is never an excuse, either physically and or spiritually. We have long ago proven that any and all use of a Crown copyright legal name is, in fact, fraud, regardless of whether or not we were aware of it. Inasmuch as ignorance of this truth was never one's intent, it is equally not a defense either. Those that make the laws must obey the laws. That which we agree to, we are in contract to by willful consent. This is about regaining our full responsibility, nothing more, and certainly nothing less. So what is really happening when someone goes into a bank for a loan or mortgage account, etc.? As a result of our willful acceptance of all things system, there was much hidden from view because our ignorance had kept us blind. That is the case no longer. A living being cannot enter into a contract with a dead corporate entity, but one who is acting as a dead legal fiction can. This applies to both sides of the equation with every contract or deal ever agreed to. I didn't say signed, I said agreed to. If one has agreed to something, they are already in a spiritual intent-filled contract, and bound to it accordingly. The instant you even thought about getting a loan, you were already in contract via that self-same intent. In my own efforts to uncover what was really going on, I followed countless trails of the vulgarity called legal, and the one thing that always came to the surface was that every bit of the legal system is pure distraction in the physical, keeping us never looking as to the spiritual nature of these things. Signing on a line made you the underwriter. An X on the line meant no consideration, accommodating party, UCC this, and legal bullshit that, because I wasn't getting deep enough into the true spiritual aspects, being mainly distracted to the as below and not really seeing the as above. Given the myriads of twists and turns with all things legal, it became abundantly clear that the entire legal system and its machinations was nothing more than distraction designed to keep an egocentric left mind content to play with the details with the devils. The truth is, every contract you ever went into with the legal name was, is, and will always be pure fraud until you uncover the original intent of the creators of the legal name system. The birth certificate is all the prima facie evidence one requires to prosecute everyone and anyone who attempts to create a legal joinder, assumption, presumption, by using that name at all. Now, with that being said, the original sin is in plain sight now. Was it mine or yours intent to commit fraud knowingly? Well, of course it wasn't, but that can't be said about those that created the name fraud to begin with. The mere fact that a cop puts on a uniform is proof of intent via the execution of their duties to aid and abet a living being into committing fraud unknowingly, because without a name joinder, the cop has no jurisdiction, being as they are themselves dead by consent. It is not a fluke that cops are now having not for identification on their business cards. Oh, if you can get one. I did recently through a friend, and this is proof positive that they are now having to yield under the pressure of us restoring our own honor, and by default, forcing their hand as well. For everyone that has ever got a loan from the bank, or those stupidly considering this, here's something to think about. The account you think is yours isn't. The name is owned by the Crown, the legal one, not the lawful one. Unfortunately, if someone even utters their name, it can be assumed and presumed immediately to be the legal one. The bank is a registered corporation, just like your name, so it too is owned by the Crown as a result. As a point in case, so is the United Nations and all countries registered. There has been a lot of talk about some New World Order coming, when the truth is, the New World Order has been in full force and effect for thousands of years. The easiest way to keep people from seeing this is to keep telling them that it isn't there yet. You can't find something if you think it isn't there yet. The New World Order has been around for millennia, as long as any exchange, barter, or money system has been in place. Today's version is the same as the old, where the mark of the beast is the legal name, and the whore of Babylon is commerce. If you don't believe me, see how far you get in this world without their legal identification to conduct day-to-day commerce, travel, survival. With the backdrop nicely set, let's see what is really happening when we go into a bank to get a loan or a mortgage then. On the surface, it looks like one goes into a bank, meets with a bank official to ask for and set the terms of the loan mortgage, stated as contract hereafter, goes through the illusional hoops of, do you qualify? The paperwork gets drawn up, you sign it, and voila, the bank seemingly gives you the needed funds. In the world once deemed as normal, this explanation would suffice. Let's use a mortgage as the example here. Always keep in mind that only the living can contract with the living, never with a corporation or dead thing. So let's look only at the living people involved, because a bank by any name is still just a dead corporation. So we have to trail and track the living beings involved. For sake of simplicity, I'm going to use the original bank as the dead entity, namely the Bank of England, since it was the first bank and the one that usurped the living crown in the form of William III, with the dead crown replacement hereafter referred to simply as the Crown Corporation. Since it is only you and the loans officer or bank manager, the living involved, well, so who then is really borrowing the money? Remember, only living parties can contract, never the dead. This is where the consent of all living parties involved comes into play, and the various contracts they are intimately, by consent, are bound to spiritually, by intent. The bank manager had to willfully consent to fill out an application form to work for the bank, and is thus in contract to and with the bank, or more accurately, its owners, who establish all the bylaws for that corporation. Behind every dead corporation, a living being is involved. A corporation only exists because of the intent someone had to create it. Fact. We now know who the parties are, and it is just you and the living being acting in the role of bank manager, bound to all the obligations they consent to by being an employee of a bank that someone ultimately owns. In the case of the Bank of England, it is deemed the being who holds the office of corporation sole. What is really happening is that you are creating a loan for the bank manager, not yourself. It is the bank manager that is getting the money to buy your house that you think is yours. But then you'll look at the agreement and see that you are only deemed tenant. It is the bank manager that is the land or property homeowner, not you or the bank itself. You were presented with the documents prepared by the bank manager for you to sign. What you don't realize is that the contract is completed not when you sign it, but when you agreed to get one in the first place, and then it was sealed when you touched it. Did you use gloves to sign it? Not likely, and it was your DNA and the DNA of the bank manager that sealed the contract, not the ink. When you begin to realize the DNA connection, you begin to see why your DNA was grabbed as a baby with both footprints and blood taken. This was done to create lawful joinder with your DNA and the name, with the consent given under seal when your parents registered your name, and is evidenced with only a copy of the original sealed deal in the registry book. Yes, your DNA can be connected easily to mom and dad, where the mitochondrial DNA from mom is the permanent record of all lineages back. What has happened when you seal the deal with your new debtor, called the bank manager, is that you are merely the guarantor of their loan and are secondary status in this arrangement, because the real holder in due course is the bank representative, and why you will never see the original again, because it is not yours to ask for. All the liability of the loans, every one of them, is on the shoulders of each and every living being that works for and in any all financial institutions, and is party to any and all loans, etc. Since all things Crown are all things Bank of England, and all things registered are all things Crown owned, who now owns everything? It is not a pretty picture, but a vastly clever ruse that is finally in the light of day. In a nutshell, you lend the bank manager money so they can buy your house for you to be a tenant in. And then, if the mortgage doesn't get paid, who does the bank come after? It was the bank manager's loan, and they skipped out on day one, leaving you to pay their debt as the guarantor for them. You can't even deal this legally because you're a third-party interloper in the whole charade of three-card Monty by the bank. You haven't got a legal leg to stand on, but you do have a lawful one. Well, privately prosecute the deadbeat borrower known as the bank manager. The fundamental flaw of this scam is that once a fraud is revealed where it was intended by design, the fraud in all contracts are rendered null and void, nunc pro tunc. The legal name was a fraud with intent, as were the loans and mortgages of all kinds. The contract is between you and the other living party always. What happens next is that the bank forecloses on the property that their employee skipped out on paying for. Remember, the employee, also known as bank manager, has a living contract with their employer that hired them, and so it goes all the way up the line to the board of directors, to the most responsible of all, the chief executive officer on that board. Needless to say, the bank grabs legally the property that their employee owns, and they kick you, the tenant, out, and then proceed to dupe another victim into the same scam. It does not end there. This is the new beginning of taking down this whore of Babylon, the dead crone mother, the Kronos who eats their own children so never to be overthrown. Well, the whore missed eating me, but it was a very narrow escape. Feel free to take the time to absorb this, because it takes time to see behind this veil. The only use the left mind has for me is codifying the creative etheric thoughts of my right brain, the one I live in. You're out in left field if you're not in your right mind, and it will forever be at effect to it until you break free of normal thinking that is based solely in programming. All levels of trickery in the legal world have been utilized to keep us off the true trail of living versus impossibly dead contracts. We first had to expose the name fraud and how our complacency and acceptance was used against us, and we revealed the source fraud. By doing this, we can separate the dead from the living in this world. Those using legal names and identification are deemed dead by their own consent, and we, the living, who have been born again, in quotes, and wield the real power now. Inasmuch as the bank manager or whoever contracted with you is the accused, they are automatically deemed dead fictions by consent, where we, the living, are witnesses to these crimes, including, and foremost, the name fraud. It's time we made these deadbeats and their masters accountable, where ignorance of these facts is not an excuse in the same way neither was our own ignorance. Once again, the real guilty parties want us to keep fighting amongst ourselves, where the true criminals are the ones that own these corporations. Still, we're going to have to prosecute a few of these people and get it on the record. The joy of one single victory on the record is that it changes the whole panorama of the system completely. This is the power of one, literally. If but one shall awaken. Yes, it's a little late for them now, where it is my wish to simply end this nonsense and just get back to the living. The best part about the golden rule is that for every harm done in action is one that must be experienced in the mirror. So be careful what you wish for, especially against others. What ye sow, so shall ye reap, is pure truth and fact. For those seeing this and wishing to privately prosecute, as I will, just check for a justice of the peace or similar type in your area for starting that process. And again, all you got to do is put the intent in there and watch them squirm. Hey, they bluff? Well, we're not bluffing. We have the royal flush here, but it's still just put your cards up. Let's see what you got. Yeah, they're going to see a lot of people folding on this. Remember, once these goons catch on, they will try and make it difficult for you where no help will be given. This one is on your shoulders as it is on mine, but I never take no for an answer, and any and all things plopped into any all courts belongs to them. Once a clerk touches your paperwork, they have contracted the courts, their employers, on their behalf. In the world of phonics, the one who touches, touches.